The small, quiet village nestled deep within the frosty hills was blanketed in snow. The night was unusually still, as if the world itself had decided to take a deep breath. The only sounds were the soft whispers of wind brushing against the frozen trees and the occasional soft thud of snowflakes landing on the ground. In the center of the village stood an old, creaking house, its windows glowing with the warm light of a crackling fire. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon, pine, and the sweet, familiar scent of roasted chestnuts. The fireplace cast flickering shadows on the walls, giving the room a soft, comforting glow. The fire crackled lazily, its flames dancing as if they were tired, ready for the night to end. In front of the hearth sat an old man, his long, snowy beard falling down to his chest. He wore a thick red robe, now worn with age, the fabric softened by years of wear. His eyes were heavy, blinking slowly, as if the warmth of the fire was pulling him into a deep, comforting sleep. The room around him seemed to sigh, the quiet hum of the village barely reaching his ears. Santa Claus. Yes, the very same Santa who had filled the hearts of children with joy for centuries, was tired. He had been delivering presents for what felt like forever, his sleigh worn down from the constant flights through the cold winter sky. Now, in the calm of his little home, he longed for nothing more than rest. The crackling of the fire seemed to blend with the rhythmic beating of his heart, soothing him, coaxing him deeper into his chair. His fingers, gnarled from years of pulling sleigh reins, gently traced the edge of the chair's armrest, feeling the worn grooves in the wood. Outside, the wind howled, but it didn't matter. He was safe here, in this little haven, where the world could not reach him. But as the clock on the mantelpiece ticked on, a strange sensation stirred within him. A cold draft swept through the room, making the flames flicker and dance wildly for a moment. Santa's tired eyes snapped open. For a moment, everything was still. The fire had dimmed, and the house seemed to grow colder. He blinked again, slowly, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had crept into his bones. The warmth from the fire wasn't enough anymore. Something had changed. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. It was as if the air itself had become thicker. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in, the quiet of the room pressing down on him. His heartbeat quickened, each thump louder than the last. He could hear the wind, now howling with a sudden intensity. The snow outside seemed to swirl more violently. Santa strained his ears, listening. Then, the faintest whisper, a soft, almost inaudible murmur. It was coming from somewhere deep within the house. He stood slowly, his body aching from the long years of his work. The wood beneath his feet groaned as he made his way toward the sound. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. The soft hum of the house had turned into something else, something unsettling. The whisper grew louder, until it was almost a chant. Santa's heart skipped a beat. He recognized it. It was a voice he had not heard in centuries. The sound of children's laughter. But there was something wrong about it. It was hollow, distant, like a memory echoing through time. The voice seemed to be everywhere, bouncing off the walls and seeping into the very fabric of the house. Santa's breathing quickened. His eyes darted to the door, half open, the cold draft spilling into the room. The firelight flickered and dimmed, casting long, strange shadows across the floor. It was as if the world was shifting, warping before his eyes. The voice stopped. Silence. Then, without warning, the air turned ice cold. The floor beneath his feet trembled. A chill ran through Santa's body, settling deep in his bones. He opened the door, his heart racing now. Outside, the wind howled like a beast, relentless and wild. The snowstorm had worsened. But there, in the distance, just past the tree-line, something moved. A figure.
Tall, dark,
unmoving. Santa's breath caught in his throat. The figure seemed to be waiting for him. And it was then that he realized the house wasn't the only thing that had changed. The world itself had shifted. The Christmas magic was fading, and something had come to take its place. Santa's gaze fixed on the distant figure, his heart pounding in his chest. The wind howled louder, a terrifying, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. The figure, tall and shadowy, remained motionless. There was something unnerving about its stillness, an unnatural quality to its presence. Santa took a slow step forward, his boots creaking on the wooden floor, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had fallen over the room. He reached for the doorframe, his hand trembling slightly as the chill in the air deepened. A heavy, oppressive feeling filled the space. The warmth of the fire now seemed like a distant memory, swallowed up by the cold that had crept into every corner of the room. The figure outside did not move, yet Santa could feel its gaze, even from this distance. It was as if it was waiting for him to make the first move, to step into the unknown. But something told him that the figure was not a mere visitor. No, it was something far more ancient, far more sinister. Santa felt the weight of his years pressing down on him. He had delivered gifts to children for centuries, seen countless Christmases come and go, but this was different. He turned away from the door, his breath shallow as he made his way to the window. Peering through the frosted glass, he tried to focus on the figure again. It hadn't moved, but now there was a shift in the air, a hum, barely perceptible, like an electric current running through the ground. Santa's pulse quickened. He pressed his hand to the window, the cold seeping through his palm, chilling him to the core. The world outside seemed darker now, the once serene snowfall now swirling violently. The trees bent under the force of the wind, their limbs twisting in unnatural directions. It was as if the earth itself had grown restless, stirred by the presence of something ancient, something forgotten. A sudden, sharp pain ran through Santa's head, as if the air itself was cutting through his thoughts. He winced and stumbled back, holding his temples. The whispers from earlier returned, louder now, chaotic, disjointed, and frantic. They seemed to be calling his name. The voice of children, sweet and innocent, had turned into something distorted, something darker. Santa's hands shook as he tried to steady himself. The figure outside remained still, its shadow growing longer as the night stretched on. But Santa could feel it, feel the weight of its presence bearing down on him. The magic of Christmas, the joy that had once filled the world, was slipping away. He could feel the threads unraveling, the warmth fading from the air. And as he looked again at the figure, he realized the truth. It wasn't waiting for him to approach. It was waiting for the end. The end of Christmas. The end of everything he had known. A creeping dread settled in his stomach. Santa knew that whatever force had arrived was not of this world, nor was it something he could defeat with the power of magic. This was something far older, far more dangerous. The figure was not just a visitor. It was the harbinger of change. A change that Santa had not been prepared for. The room seemed to darken further, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. The once familiar sounds of the village outside, the soft murmur of the wind, the quiet snowfall, had fallen silent. The world outside had gone still, as if it, too, was waiting. And in that moment, Santa understood the truth. Christmas was ending. The magic that had sustained it for so long was no longer enough. And now there was only the silence. And the figure, standing in the cold, waiting for what was to come next. Santa stood frozen, his breath visible in the frigid air, as the oppressive silence pressed against him. His mind raced, but his body felt heavy, trapped in place by an invisible force. The figure outside remained motionless, its presence like a shadow stretching across the land. Santa's heart thudded in his chest, each beat louder than the last, as he struggled to make sense of what was happening. The whispers had faded, but the cold had become unbearable. It was no longer the gentle chill of winter, but a bone-deep cold, seeping into his very soul. His fingers trembled as he pulled his robe tighter around himself, the warmth of the fabric offering no comfort. The fire in the hearth had dimmed even further, the flames now just flickers of orange, as if they, too, were losing their strength. The room felt hollow, empty, as though the magic that had filled it for so long was being drained away, leaving only the echoes of what once was. Santa turned back to the door, his heart heavy with an unspoken dread. He had been the keeper of Christmas, the bringer of joy, but in this moment, he felt small, powerless. The figure outside had not moved, but Santa could feel its gaze piercing through the glass, through the walls, as if it were studying him, waiting for something. What was it waiting for? The answer gnawed at the edges of his mind. The last shred of warmth in the room disappeared, replaced by an icy stillness that seemed to cling to the very air. Santa's body tensed as he felt a strange pull, something deep within him urging him to step outside. But he resisted, unsure of what awaited him in the storm. For the first time in centuries, he felt afraid. Afraid of what he might find. He could no longer deny it. The magic of Christmas, the joy that had fueled him for so long, was slipping away. And in its place, something darker, colder, was taking root. The world outside had changed. The snowstorm had grown violent, the winds howling like wild animals, and yet the figure remained unmoving in the distance. Santa's mind reeled as he tried to make sense of it all, but the answers were elusive, slipping through his fingers like the snowflakes outside. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the house, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and for a moment, Santa thought the house might collapse. The figure outside shifted, just slightly, and in that moment, Santa saw it. A pair of eyes, cold, unblinking, staring directly at him. The eyes were not human. They were ancient, otherworldly, and full of a dark, eternal knowing. Santa's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. The figure wasn't waiting for the end of Christmas. It was waiting for the beginning of something new. A new force, a new power, had come to claim what was left. And Santa, the jolly old man who had once brought joy to every corner of the earth, was no longer the master of the magic. He was merely a spectator, a relic of a time that was slipping away. The wind outside howled louder, the snow swirling in a dizzying dance of white. Santa took a hesitant step toward the door, his feet unsure, his body heavy with the weight of years and the loss of everything he had once held dear. But as he reached for the handle, a low, guttural voice pierced the air. It was not the voice of a child, but something far darker, far colder. A whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Time is up, Santa." Santa's hand froze on the door. The voice seemed to vibrate in his bones, carrying a terrible finality. The magic was gone, replaced by something else, something that would change the world forever. And Santa, he was no longer in control. The air around Santa thickened, the words echoing in his mind like a distant drumbeat, their weight settling heavily in his chest. His hand remained on the door handle, unmoving, as if the force of the voice had rooted him to the spot. "Time is up, Santa," the voice repeated, its tone cold and unyielding. The wind outside howled louder still, the storm's fury growing, as if the very world itself was being torn apart. Santa's heart raced, and for the first time in ages, he felt utterly powerless. For all his years of delivering joy, of maintaining the magic of Christmas, this was beyond him. He turned, his eyes scanning the room, desperate for some sign of hope, some way to stop what was happening. But there was nothing. The fire, once a warm beacon, was now nothing more than a dying flicker, barely holding onto its life. The shadows in the room stretched unnaturally long, reaching toward him like dark hands trying to pull him into the abyss. His gaze darted toward the window, but the figure was no longer standing at the edge of the trees. It had moved closer. In fact, it was no longer outside at all. A soft, eerie click echoed behind him. The door to the room creaked open on its own. Santa's breath caught in his throat, his body stiff with fear. The figure, now closer, standing in the doorway, was tall, its form cloaked in black. The air around it was thick with an unnatural chill, colder than anything Santa had ever felt. The figure's eyes were hollow, like dark pits that seemed to pull the very light from the room. It was not human, and its presence was a void, a darkness that swallowed everything it touched. Santa felt a sudden, unrelenting wave of dread wash over him. The weight of the world pressed down on his chest, as if the very air had become too thick to breathe. The figure spoke again, its voice a low, rasping whisper that seemed to seep into Santa's bones. "You are the keeper, Santa Claus, but no longer. The magic you once knew has faded. The time for old legends has ended." Santa's legs shook beneath him, and he took a step back. The figure did not move, but its eyes followed his every movement, unblinking, watching, waiting. "What do you want?" Santa's voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. The figure's lips curled into a cold, distant smile. "I have come to reclaim what is mine," it replied. "The world you once knew is no more. The Christmas you cherished has died, and with it you." Santa's chest tightened, and the truth of its words sank in. The magic that had fueled him for centuries, the joy, the spirit, the wonder, was gone. He could feel it slipping away, like sand through his fingers. The world was changing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The figure's shadow seemed to stretch across the room, engulfing everything in its path. The warmth that had once filled this place, that had filled Santa's heart, was gone. There was only cold, darkness, and the unyielding presence of the figure before him. Santa's voice trembled, but he found the courage to speak. "If Christmas is dead, then what will come in its place?" The figure's smile grew wider, and it stepped forward, its presence almost suffocating. "It is not for you to understand, Santa. It is for you to fade, as all things must. You were once the keeper, but now you are just a relic of a forgotten time." Santa's knees buckled beneath him, and he sank to the floor, the weight of the figure's words crashing down on him. The room seemed to darken further, the shadows closing in around him. The last vestiges of Christmas, the hope, the magic, the joy were vanishing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He closed his eyes, feeling the cold seep deeper into his bones. The world had moved on, leaving him behind. And as the figure's shadow enveloped him, Santa finally understood. The Christmas he had known, the magic that had once been so powerful, was gone. And there was no place for him in this new world. Santa's body felt heavy, as if the very essence of who he was being drained away with each passing second. The cold, so intense it seemed to freeze his thoughts, clung to him like a suffocating blanket. He blinked slowly, his vision blurring at the edges as the shadows of the room closed in tighter, pressing against him. The figure, now standing directly before him, towered over him like a dark sentinel, its cold presence engulfing him. Santa could no longer feel the warmth of his robe, the faint glow of the fire, or even the faint pulse of Christmas magic that had once surged through him. It was all gone. The years, the laughter, the joy, it all seemed like a dream, fading into the fog of time. The figure's eyes, black and empty, stared down at him with a gaze so cold it seemed to pierce through his very soul. "Do you see now?" the figure whispered, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves, hollow and unsettling. Santa could barely find the strength to answer. The weight of it all, of the loss, the endless years of giving and caring, seemed to crush him. There was no fight left in him, no defiance, only a deep, gnawing sense of emptiness. He had given everything, and now he had nothing. The figure bent down slowly, its shadow wrapping around Santa like tendrils, drawing him deeper into its grasp. "You are the keeper," it continued, its voice now a low hum. "But you were never meant to hold it forever. The magic, it was always fleeting, a temporary flicker in time." Santa tried to raise his hand, to reach out, to stop it. But his fingers were stiff, numb, as though the life had been drained from them. The figure's smile widened, a chilling, malevolent grin. "Time runs out for everyone, Santa. Even you." Santa's thoughts grew more distant, the weight of the moment pressing harder. The world beyond the shadows felt far away, a fading memory, and as he let his eyes fall shut, he realized that the magic he had held in his heart for so long was not something he could hold onto forever. It had faded. Santa could feel it now, the deep, relentless void that had come to claim him, to claim everything he had once known. And though his heart ached with the weight of everything that was slipping away, he could not stop it. He could not fight the inevitable. The figure leaned closer, its face a dark blur in the shadows, its breath cold against Santa's cheek. "Rest now," it whispered, its voice a final sigh. "Your time is done." And with that, the last trace of warmth in the room faded entirely. The shadows consumed Santa entirely, and in that moment, the world outside, the joy, the Christmas magic, all of it seemed to vanish, leaving nothing but an endless, suffocating void. The figure stood alone in the silence, its task complete, as the echoes of a forgotten time faded into nothingness. The figure stood unmoving in the midst of the hollow room, its form enveloped in the oppressive silence that had descended upon the house. Santa was gone. The fire, now reduced to cold ashes, was little more than a memory of warmth. The wind outside howled in the distance, but it was distant, as if the world itself had withdrawn into some other, darker place. The figure's eyes, cold and infinite, scanned the room, as if ensuring that nothing remained but the void. For a long moment, the air itself seemed to still, frozen in place by the finality of what had just transpired. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible motion, the figure turned. It moved toward the door, its long, shadowy cloak trailing behind it, leaving a trail of chilling emptiness in its wake. As it reached for the door handle, the house seemed to breathe a final sigh. The cold lingered, thick and heavy, as the door creaked open. And then, the figure was gone. Outside, the storm continued to rage, the winds howling like they had never ceased. But there was something different now. The snow had stopped falling. The world was frozen, untouched. The streets of the village were eerily silent, devoid of the usual sounds of life. It was as though the very fabric of existence had been drained, leaving only a hushed, unbearable quiet. And yet, even in the stillness, a strange feeling hung in the air, like the anticipation before a storm, as if something were waiting to emerge from the shadows. Back inside the house, where once there had been warmth, there was now only the chilling presence of the absence left behind. The chair where Santa had once sat was empty, the seat now cold and unwelcoming. The walls, once vibrant with the memory of laughter and joy, now stood as silent witnesses to the end of an era. But even in this silence, a strange sensation lingered in the air, something faint but unmistakable. A ripple of warmth, almost imperceptible at first, began to stir in the far corner of the room. It was so subtle that at first it could have been mistaken for a trick of the mind. But as the warmth grew, a faint glow appeared, flickering like the first spark of a new fire. The warmth spread slowly, filling the room with a soft, golden hue that pushed back the darkness. At first, it seemed fragile, like a fragile ember trying to ignite. But then, slowly, it grew stronger. The faintest sound, a gentle, melodic hum, filled the room, soft and sweet, like the first strains of a lullaby. In the middle of the room, where Santa had once sat, a soft figure appeared. It was not large, nor was it shadowy. It was small, delicate, almost ethereal in its presence. A soft glow surrounded it, a warmth that was the antithesis of everything that had just been. It moved gently, almost with reverence, toward the hearth. And as the figure knelt by the cold ashes, a sudden burst of light filled the room. It was bright, pure, and filled with a deep, ancient magic. The air shifted, and where once there had been nothing, There was now something, a pulse, a heartbeat, a thread of light weaving through the room. The warmth was no longer fragile. It was alive. It was Christmas. A new beginning. A force beyond time and beyond the figure's cold presence had taken root, quietly but firmly, in the house. And with it came a promise. Though one era had ended, another was beginning. The magic of Christmas was never gone. It simply changed, like the seasons, like the heartbeats of the earth itself. And now it had found its new home. With the flicker of light that now filled the room, a soft laugh, light and joyous, rang out. The figure that had once been so dark was now nothing more than a shadow in the corner, slowly fading into the distance. For the magic of Christmas had been reborn, and the world, though quiet for now, would never be the same. The light continued to grow, slowly filling the room with a sense of peace and warmth that was both comforting and exhilarating. It was as if the very essence of Christmas had been revived, its heartbeat steady and strong once more. The shadows that had once claimed the space now shrank back, retreating into the corners as if they knew they no longer belonged. The figure, small and ethereal, rose to its feet, its glow illuminating the room in a soft, golden hue. It moved with grace, its movements fluid and purposeful, like a presence from another realm, one that had always existed but had been hidden from the world for too long. The warmth that radiated from it filled the house completely, embracing every corner, every surface, every forgotten inch of space that had once been touched by the magic of Christmas. Outside, the winds had died down. The storm, though still fierce in the distance, had loosened its grip on the world. The night sky above was no longer swallowed by dark clouds, but instead, it was dotted with stars that shone brightly, as if reclaiming their place in the heavens. The snow had returned, but now it fell gently, like soft whispers of magic in the air, each flake shimmering in the light of the reborn Christmas spirit. Inside, the figure moved toward the fireplace, kneeling beside the cold ashes once more. It reached into the hearth, its hands glowing with a warmth that seemed to make the stones of the fireplace tremble. With a single motion, it whispered something soft and secret, and a new flame appeared. It flickered brightly, its light dancing like the heartbeat of a new dawn. The figure rose, gazing down at the flame with quiet satisfaction. It seemed to pulse with life, a promise of hope, of renewal. The figure stepped back, and with a final glance at the room, it began to fade, its form becoming almost indistinct in the light. But before it vanished completely, it turned once more to the hearth, where the warmth now spread, glowing steadily and reassuringly. As it did, the faintest sound of bells rang in the distance, soft and melodic. It was as if the world itself had remembered how to laugh again, how to dream. The figure smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and in that moment, Santa's legacy, his spirit, his joy, had been passed on. Not with a loud proclamation, but with the softest, most tender of gestures. The Christmas magic, after all, had never truly left. It had simply been waiting for the right time to return, and now, in this quiet, sacred moment, it had found its place once more. The figure disappeared, leaving behind a room filled with warmth, light, and the promise of something new. And outside, the world had changed. The winds had quieted, the storm had passed, and the snow now fell gently across the earth, a blanket of peaceful serenity. In the distance, the faintest outline of a sleigh appeared in the sky, its bells chiming softly. It was not the sleigh of the past, but something brighter, something that carried the weight of a new world, a new beginning. The world was still, but it was alive. The magic was still there. And Christmas, in its purest form, would always find its way back, no matter how dark or cold the night might seem. In time, the echoes of joy would return, filling the hearts of all who believed. And as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, painting the world in golden hues, the story of Christmas continued, whispered softly through the winds. A new chapter had begun. As the first light of dawn touched the snow-covered ground, a new day began to emerge, quiet and serene, but filled with the promise of something profound. The world, still wrapped in its blanket of snow, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Each flake that drifted from the sky sparkled with a purity that had been missing for so long, as if the earth itself had been cleansed, made anew by the magic that had returned. In the distance, the silhouette of a sleigh, bright and glowing, moved gracefully across the sky, its bells ringing out a gentle, joyous melody that echoed softly through the stillness. It was not the sleigh that once carried Santa, the jolly man of Christmas, but something more, a vessel of hope, a symbol of rebirth. And though it moved swiftly, it did not race. It floated, as if guided by an unseen force, as if it were following a new path, one that was guided by a softer, more enduring kind of magic. Below, in the quiet village, the first stirrings of life began to emerge. The houses, once dark and cold, now glimmered with the soft light of awakening. Through the windows, the warmth of hearths could be seen, their flames dancing in the morning light. Families began to stir, their movements slow but purposeful. Children awoke with quiet wonder in their eyes, drawn to the window where the world had transformed overnight into something magical. The snow, so soft and pure, seemed to carry with it a sense of possibility, as though it whispered to them, urging them to dream, to believe. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the world, the spirit of Christmas breathed once more. The figure, small, glowing, ethereal, was nowhere to be seen, but its presence lingered, woven into the very fabric of the morning. It had not left. It had only faded, become a part of the world it had awakened. The house that had once felt so cold and empty now felt full of life again, the walls alive with the faintest hum of energy. It was a hum that came not from the fireplace, nor from the magic that had once been Santa's, but from something new, something fresh. The air itself was filled with potential, a new kind of warmth that would spread, slowly but surely, to every heart, every home. Christmas was not gone. It had merely transformed, like a flame being rekindled, waiting for those who still believed to fan it into something brighter. The village slowly came to life as morning stretched its fingers into the sky, casting light over the earth, warming it, filling it with a quiet joy. In the distance, where the sleigh had passed, the faintest glimmer of starlight shimmered in the horizon. It was as if the stars themselves had joined in the celebration, their light dancing across the heavens in a final, jubilant proclamation. The world had been reborn. Christmas had been reborn. And with it, the knowledge that magic, true, pure magic, could never be lost. It could only change, waiting patiently for the right moment to return. And so, the story of Christmas continued, whispered in the winds, carried through the snow, and etched into the hearts of all who dared to believe. And though the world was different, one thing remained the same: the warmth, the love, and the light that Christmas brought would always return, no matter how long it took. For it was not just a holiday, but a spirit, one that could never truly fade. It was a spirit that would carry on forevermore. As the morning sun climbed higher into the sky, its rays pierced through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the world below. The village, still blanketed in a soft layer of snow, seemed to shimmer with life, as though every surface had been touched by something magical. The streets, once quiet and still, were now filled with the soft crunch of footsteps as villagers ventured out into the crisp morning air, drawn to the transformation that had taken place overnight. The air felt different, fresh, clean, and imbued with an energy that was both gentle and powerful. The children, their eyes wide with wonder, gathered in the streets, their laughter echoing through the village as they twirled and danced in the snow, their cheeks rosy from the cold and their hearts full of joy. It was as if the world had suddenly become a playground, a place where dreams could be realized and hopes could take flight. And even the adults, those who had long since forgotten the magic of Christmas, found themselves caught up in the spirit. They exchanged smiles and kind words, their hearts lighter than they had been in years, as if the weight of the world had been momentarily lifted. The air buzzed with the faint hum of something beautiful, something eternal, something that had always been there, just waiting to be remembered. The old church bell rang out across the village, its chimes soft yet resonant, a reminder that life, in all its forms, continued to move forward, guided by a force beyond understanding. And as the bell tolled, a figure appeared at the edge of the village, walking slowly but with purpose. It was cloaked in a soft light, its presence not imposing but comforting, as if it belonged to the very fabric of the morning. The villagers turned toward it, their eyes following the figure as it made its way toward the center of town. The air shifted, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause, held in the quiet reverence of the moment. And then, as if on cue, the figure spoke, its voice gentle and filled with warmth. "Do not be afraid," it said, its words carrying on the wind. "Christmas has not gone. It was never truly lost." The villagers stood frozen, their hearts swelling with a mixture of awe and recognition. They knew, deep within themselves, that this was no ordinary figure. It was a part of the spirit they had been waiting for, a spirit they had not even realized was still alive within them. The figure continued, its voice like a soothing melody. "You carry the magic with you, in your hearts, in your kindness, in your love. Christmas lives on in the ways you care for one another." And as the figure spoke, the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with a newfound energy, a pulse that resonated in their bones. The warmth that had begun to fill the air spread deeper, seeping into every corner of the village, filling it with an undeniable sense of hope. And for the first time in a long while, the villagers remembered what it felt like to truly believe. To believe not just in the magic of Christmas, but in the magic of kindness, of love, of shared joy and connection. The figure, its form now becoming faint and wispy, began to fade, but not before turning to the villagers one last time, offering a soft smile, a gesture that carried all the warmth and love of the world. "Carry this light with you always," the figure said, its voice fading into the wind. "For it is in you that Christmas will live forever." And just like that, the figure was gone. But the light it left behind remained, glowing softly in the hearts of the villagers. The village, once quiet and still, was now filled with life, laughter, and an unwavering sense of magic that would never fade. For Christmas, in its purest form, had returned, not as a holiday, but as a living, breathing force that would continue to shape the world for years to come. And so, as the village settled into the warmth of the morning, the promise of Christmas echoed in the hearts of all who had witnessed the miracle, reminding them that the spirit of the season was not just a fleeting moment, but something eternal, something that lived within them all. A spirit that would carry them through the darkest of nights and into the brightest of tomorrows. For Christmas was not a day, it was a light that would never go out. The light that had been left behind by the figure continued to glow softly, like a quiet ember that had been gently stoked back to life. It was not a blinding light, but one that pulsed with a gentle warmth, spreading throughout the village, wrapping around each home, each person, each heart. It was a light that did not demand attention, but one that invited people to pause and feel the magic in the air, to remember the true meaning of Christmas. The villagers, still in awe of the moment they had just experienced, felt something deep within them stir. It was a feeling that went beyond words, beyond understanding. It was the feeling of unity, of connection, of being part of something greater than themselves. As the morning continued to unfold, life in the village returned to its usual rhythms, but something had shifted. The children, their laughter now lighter and brighter than before, ran through the snow, their footsteps leaving behind trails of joy. The adults, with their hearts now open in ways they hadn't been in years, greeted one another with genuine warmth, their conversations filled with kindness and understanding. Even the old woman who had once complained about the cold, her heart hardened by years of solitude, found herself smiling as she watched the children play. For the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of something old and familiar inside her, something she had thought long forgotten. The warmth of the village spread further, reaching even the hearts of those who had doubted, who had lost their way. It was as if the light had reminded them of who they were and who they could be, reminded them that the spirit of Christmas was not confined to a single day, but lived in every act of kindness, every shared smile, every moment of love. As the day wore on, the village gathered at the town square, where the Christmas tree stood tall and proud, its branches covered in twinkling lights. The tree had been there for years, but today, it seemed to sparkle with a new kind of magic, its lights shimmering like stars in the night sky. The villagers stood around it, holding hands, sharing stories, and singing songs that were not just about Christmas, but about life, about love, and about the joy that comes when hearts are open. The bells of the church rang once more, their chimes ringing out across the village like a soft, melodic prayer. And for a moment, time seemed to stand still. In that moment, everything was as it should be. The world was full of magic. And the magic was not in the presents, the decorations, or the festivities. It was in the hearts of the people, in their ability to love, to care, to believe in something greater than themselves. And as the sun began to set, casting a soft glow over the village, the air filled with a deep, peaceful silence. It was a silence that carried the weight of years gone by, but also the promise of what was to come. For Christmas, in its most true and lasting form, was not about what was given or received. It was about the spirit that lived within every person, every home, every heart. And as the night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, the villagers knew that the magic of Christmas would never leave them. It would always be there, in the laughter of children, in the kindness of neighbors, in the warmth of shared moments, and in the quiet, glowing light that would always guide them. The spirit of Christmas was eternal. It lived within them all, and with it, the world would always be filled with hope, with love, and with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And so, the story of Christmas, of magic, of warmth, of light, continued, woven into the fabric of every life it touched. For Christmas was not just a day. It was a way of being, a way of loving, a way of believing, and it would carry on forevermore. The night deepened, and the village settled into a peaceful quiet, the kind that only follows after a day filled with warmth, laughter, and connection. The stars above twinkled brightly, like tiny whispers from the past, reminders of the countless generations that had celebrated Christmas before them, each one carrying the same spirit, the same hope. In the soft glow of lanterns, the villagers began to make their way back to their homes, their hearts light and full, their minds at peace with the world around them. But even as the last of the footsteps faded, the magic lingered. It hung in the air like a promise, a delicate thread that wove itself into every corner of the village. In the small homes, families gathered around their hearths, the fire flickering softly, its warm glow casting shadows on the walls, dancing to the rhythm of the night. The children, still buzzing with the joy of the day, drifted off to sleep one by one, their dreams filled with visions of snowflakes and reindeer, of a world where magic was always just a heartbeat away. Outside, the village stood quiet, its streets now empty of footsteps, the snow settling in gentle silence, covering the world in a blanket of stillness. And yet, there was life in the air, a deep, slow-moving hum that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself, a hum that only those who truly believed could hear. As the hours passed, the last light in the windows flickered and faded, and the village embraced the embrace of sleep, each house now a sanctuary of warmth and comfort, carrying the spirit of Christmas within its walls. But above, in the quiet sky, the sleigh continued its journey, a faint glimmer in the far distance, its bells ringing softly through the night. It was not a sound that demanded attention, but one that called out to the hearts of those who listened. And the night, though still and deep, felt full of purpose, of hope, of peace, and of the unyielding promise that no matter how dark the world might seem, there was always light waiting to break through. As dawn approached, casting a faint light over the horizon, the village remained untouched, suspended in a moment where time itself seemed to slow, held in the embrace of something timeless and eternal. The story of Christmas, of renewal, of magic, of love, would continue, carried on the winds, whispered in the snowflakes, passed down from heart to heart. And the light, though soft and quiet, would never go out. It would live forever, carried by those who believed. The spirit of Christmas had returned, and with it, the world had found its rhythm again. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, the world knew Christmas would always be here, waiting to be found, no matter how much time passed. It was not a season. It was a way of life, a way of being, of loving, and of believing. And it would live on forevermore. As the night stretched on, the village lay in peaceful slumber, its streets wrapped in a soft, shimmering coat of snow. The stars above seemed to burn brighter, as if in response to the warmth that filled every home, every heart below. The fires inside the houses crackled gently, the heat from the flames dancing and flickering as though alive with the very magic of the season. In one home, a mother stood by the window, looking out into the cold night, her breath fogging up the glass as she watched the soft fall of snowflakes. She smiled quietly to herself, her heart full, her spirit lifted by the simple joy of the evening. Christmas had come, and with it, something deeper, a renewal, a sense of unity, of connection. As she turned away from the window and moved toward the warmth of her family, a faint sound filled the air. It was soft at first, a distant jingle that seemed to rise from nowhere and everywhere all at once. It wasn't loud or intrusive. It was gentle, like the sound of a lullaby drifting on the wind. The mother paused, her steps faltering as she listened, her heart skipping a beat. Was it the wind? Or was it something more? She shook her head, dismissing the thought, yet a smile tugged at her lips. There was a magic in the air tonight, and it seemed to touch every soul, stirring something within, something timeless. Outside, in the stillness of the world, the sound of bells continued, growing fainter as the night deepened. And in the far distance, if you looked closely enough, you could see it, a glimmer, a spark of light cutting through the horizon like the softest of beacons. It was the sleigh, though not as you might have imagined it. It moved with grace and purpose, its bells ringing softly, a message carried on the wind, a promise that the spirit of Christmas, in all its forms, would never fade. And though the world continued to turn, its seasons coming and going, there would always be a place where the light of Christmas lingered, waiting to be discovered by those who believed. For Christmas was not a day to mark on a calendar. It was a way of being, a way of loving, a way of keeping the magic alive forevermore. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, the village slowly woke from its slumber. The world outside was still, wrapped in a delicate layer of snow that caught the early sunlight like diamonds scattered across the earth. The streets, though quiet, seemed to hum with the faintest echo of something profound, a gentle reminder of the magic that had passed through the village only hours before. Inside the homes, the warmth that filled the rooms was more than just the heat from the fires. It was the warmth of hearts that had been touched, of lives that had been subtly, yet deeply, changed. The spirit of Christmas had worked its quiet magic, not in grand gestures, but in the smallest, most meaningful ways, in the smiles exchanged between strangers, in the laughter of children, in the shared moments of joy that rippled through the village like a soft breeze. And though the festivities of the season had come to a close, the feeling lingered. It lived on in the hearts of those who had embraced it, who had opened their eyes to the beauty of connection, of kindness, of believing. In one home, a child woke early, her eyes bright and full of wonder as she gazed out the window. She had dreamed of a sleigh in the sky, of bells ringing softly in the distance. The dream was not forgotten, and in that moment, she knew that magic was real. As the day unfolded, the village continued its rhythm, each person carrying with them the quiet, unspoken promise that Christmas was not just a day, but a way of being. A way of living with open hearts, of seeing the good in the world, and of spreading that goodness to others. And though the world would move on, and the seasons would change, the magic that had touched the village that night would never truly fade. For it lived in the people, in their actions, their words, their hearts. And that was the truest gift of all. With the last light of day fading into the peaceful night, the village stood still once more, a place forever touched by the warmth of Christmas. And somewhere, far above, the faint sound of bells continued to ring, carried by the wind, a soft and enduring reminder that the spirit of Christmas, this gentle, unbreakable magic,